Alhamdulillah. In our sessions on the Mukhtasar of Imam Quduri, in the sections on personal law, we began last week by looking at divorce. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So we looked at the opening concepts related to divorce, and we try to give some of the context of the rulings of divorce. Now, we're looking at the types of divorce, right? وَالطَّلَاقُ عَلَى ضَرْبَيْنِ صَرِيحٍ وَكِنَايَةٍ. So, we had looked at the idea of talaq is from letting go, right? Letting go. رَفْعُ الْقَيْد, right? So, marriage is like they say in English, they say it's a bond between two parties, right? The letting go of that bond is in the hands of the man, right? The woman has a right to seek the end of the marriage, right? Through a number of ways that we will be seeing, which is either through khula, right? To free herself from her husband, right? But that requires mutual agreement, or to take the matter to the qadi, right? To take the matter to the qadi, and to seek a fasakh. In the Hanafi school, the scope of annulment in court is very limited, but in some madhabs it's wider, and we'll touch upon that there. Or just mutual agreement. She asks him, please divorce me. He says, okay, I will, without the process of khula. She can also, of course, specify the right of divorce in her contract, which particularly in the absence of uprightness in general and trustworthy, upright conduct amongst people. Yeah, that what Imam Ghazali and others call dafi'ud din, people being driven by religious values rather than just their own whim. And most religious people aren't strongly driven by religious values, sadly. Overwhelmingly. So we'll be touching upon those. So we saw that. And we saw also the wisdom of divorce counting. Yeah, the default is all divorce counts. So he tells us, rahimahullah ta'ala, وَالطَّلَاقُ عَلَى ضَرْبَيْنِ. Right? And this is in terms of the words by which talaq is pronounced. الألفاظ التي يوقع بها الطلاق. The types of words by which divorce is pronounced are of two types. صريح وكناية. Right? Explicit words of divorce, وكناية, and implicit words, right? Kinaya, right? فالصريح, right? So the first category, which is the sarih, the explicit, right? The sarih, here Imam al-Quduri says he doesn't give a definition of the sarih, but he gives an example, right? And this is one of the ways of defining something is بالتمثيل, التعريف بالتمثيل. And from that you can deduce what the definition is, right? But sometimes it makes it more clear, right? So he says, فالصريح قوله أنت طالق مثلا, right? It's like he's saying you are divorced, right? أو ومطلقة. If someone said أنت مطلقة, مطلقة, but with what? With the shadda on the lam. Because مطلقة is طلق يطلق تطليقا فهي مطلقة. Is to you have been divorced. Right? So طلق is the فعل pattern, to engage in the act of divorcing. Right? So that is active. Because if you say أنت مطلقة, right? You are mutlaq, it is not explicit. Right? Right? Because that's not one of the words for in أنت مطلقة is from أطلق يطلق إطلاقا, which is not normally used for divorce. Use طلق, يعني طلق for divorcing, right? أنت طالق or مطلقة, but you don't use أطلق. If you say أطلقتك, I have let you go, that's not explicitly used for divorce. That requires an intention, right? So that's and that's mentioned in the Hidayah. Now, it might be in the commentary somewhere as well. وقد طلقتك, I have divorced you, right? فهذا يقع به الطلاق الرجعي, right? So in these, a revocable divorce is pronounced, right? These constitute a revocable divorce. So there's a couple of concepts here, right? The sarih, the explicit divorce, Imam Allama al-Maydani gives a useful definition, right? He says in the Lubab, ما لم يستعمل إلا فيه. Explicit words of divorce are those which are not used for other than divorce, meaning in their literal usage. Right? So these are the sarih are those words that are made up of the letters of that come from the root of talaq, right? And whose customary usage is primarily using them in divorce, right? Right? Such that they're not used in primary usage for other than divorce, right? Regardless of which language they're in, right? Regardless of which language they're in. So divorce does not need to be pronounced in Arabic. And it's not just the case that if you used Arabic words it counts and in other languages. No. The sarih, whatever language they're in, counts. So that's the explicit divorce, right? What kind of divorce occurs with it? It says يقع به الطلاق الرجعي. A revocable divorce counts, right? And he'll tell us about revocable and irrevocable divorce in a little bit. But a revocable divorce, right? So, and then ولا يقع به إلا واحدة. And if someone uses an explicit word for divorce, only one divorce counts if you say it once, right? وإن نوى أكثر من ذلك. So someone said أنت طالق, one divorce counts. Even if they intend you're divorced 3 times. It counts as one if you pronounced one, right? وإن نوى أكثر من ذلك. Even if you intended more than that. Right? So it counts as one revocable divorce, and even if one intended by that expression more than that. وَلَا يَفْتَقِرُ إِلَى نِيَّةٍ. And an explicit pronouncement of divorce does not require intention. Does not require intention. Right? Because intention specifies something that is unspecified. But here it is explicit. Right? Right? And okay, so there's a couple of concepts, right? A raj'i divorce, a revocable divorce, counts as one, right? Unless, for example, it is repeated, right? Right? Unless it's repeated. Or unless you mention the number. As someone said, أنت طالق ثلاثا. Someone said, you're divorced 3 times. Then it would count as 3. But in a simple pronouncement, it counts as one, but it is raj'i, revocable, which means that within the time of the iddah, the man can take her back without requiring a new nikah. Right? A talaq al-raj'i is a talaq in which the husband can take his wife back without requiring a new nikah. Within the time of the iddah, he can take her back without requiring a new contract. Right? Without, with all its conditions. And after the section on divorce, on talaq, there is the section on al-raj'a. Right? Kitab al-raj'a, which discusses how that works and what are the sunnahs related to it. So that's the revocable divorce. In contrast to the revocable divorce is the non-revocable divorce, which may count as one or may count as more than one, depending on how it's pronounced. In a non-revocable divorce, it may count as only one, but he cannot take her back even within the time of the iddah, except through a new contract. Right? So the divorce has 2 components, right? The number, and number 2, whether it's revocable or non-revocable. So the default in the talaq, the as-sarih, in the explicit talaq, is that it is raj'i. It is raj'i. The default. There are some situations when it would not be raj'i, and it by default counts as one unless a number is mentioned or unless it's repeated multiple times. Right? And if you intend more than one, the intention alone does not count in the talaq al-raj'i. The talaq al-ba'in, we'll be looking at its rulings in a bit. The default in the talaq al-kinaya, when you use one of the indirect expressions for divorce, the default in that is that it counts as ba'in with some exceptions. And those are the ba'in that have a resemblance to those are the talaq al-kinaya that have some resemblance to the raj'i. And we'll be coming to those. Okay. So, and the explicit pronouncement of divorce does not require intention. It has to be ascribed to the woman, right? Right? It has to be ascribed to the woman, either explicitly or by address, right? Or by context. But Imam al-Lakhnawi in his Hashiyat al-Hidayah mentions that they're quoting the Kifaya. Quoting the Binaya. The Binaya being one of the commentaries on the Hidayah. Imam al-Lakhnawi quotes from the Binaya, which is by Imam Badr al-Din al-Aini. It's one of the great commentaries on the Hidayah. Imam al-Aini, of course, was also the great commentator, one of the 2 greatest commentators on Sahih al-Bukhari. Great Hanafi jurist and muhaddith, and also an imam in the Arabic language. right? And of course, his brilliance in the Arabic language is manifest in his Sahih al-Bukhari, particularly in the first half. Like, he brings out a lot of beautiful nuances of the Prophet ﷺ's words in his commentary. So that's one of the great commentaries on the Hidayah, the Binayah. So he relates ijma', scholarly consensus, that an explicit pronouncement of divorce does not require intention. So that's a serious matter. Of course, you don't go give fatwa on things like that, because there are some exceptions where it might not count, right? But this is very, very serious, right? And then he says, right? He says, وَقَوْلُهُ أَنْتِ الطَّلَاقِ. You are الطلاق. Now that's, right? You are divorce. Right? أو أنت طالق الطلاق. You are divorced with divorce. Right? أو أنت طالق طلاقا. You are divorced with divorce. Right? Right? فإن لم تكن له نية فهي واحدة رجعية. In these cases, if he does not have a specific intention, it counts as what? As a revocable divorce, right? As a talaq raj'i, right? Right? If he doesn't have any intention about number or type of divorce, it just counts as a default explicit divorce, which is one and revocable. Correct? وَإِنْ نَوَى بِهِ ثَلَاثًا كَانَ ثَلَاثًا. So someone said, أَنْتِ الطلاق. You are, if you just use like just rudimentary English, imagine you're an uncle. How would you say أَنْتِ الطلاق? You are the divorce. You are the divorce. Now, the divorce could just mean you mean one. You are the divorce, meaning you are divorced. But أنتِ الطلاق, right? Right? The masdar can refer to the action, but the masdar, as the commentator says, يحتمل العموم. Right? The masdar can also, you are, if you think about it in English, you are the divorce, meaning you are completely divorced, right? So it just could be referring to the one, or it could be referring to the three. So the intention there would count. Because you say you are divorced, there's no place to get the meaning of three in there. It refers to anti, like the simple pronouncement, the sense of the number doesn't come in. But if you use any of these expressions that are mentioned here, anti at-talaq, right? The word, because at-talaq is the masdar, it can count as three, but what does it require? So it counts as divorce, right? Because it's sarih. The default is that it is raj'i. But if he intended in these expressions three, it would count as three. Why? Because the commentator says, كان ثلاثا لأن المصدر يحتمل العموم والكثرة. Because the masdar can refer, can be generalized and multiple, right? Because it is an ism jins. At-talaq is an ism jins, as the Hidayah mentions, right? At-talaq is the category. You are the divorce. The divorce is maximally three, so that meaning could count. But for that it requires intention. But the intention of two does not count. Right? The intention of two does not count, as mentioned in the Hidayah and its commentaries. Someone intends and says, if someone said anti at-talaq, and intended two, how many does it count as? Counts as one. Okay. So this is the sarih. Right? This is the sarih. The second type is al-kinaya. And I just need a moment. Inshallah. Just Bismillah. So that's the sarih, right? That's the sarih. You can think about the sarih as being of two types, right? You have the simple explicit pronunciation, and you have the compound explicit pronunciation, which is one that has with it, like the use of the masdar, right? Like anti at-talaq or anti taliqun at-talaq or one of these. So there, because the masdar has a sense of the ism jins, of the category, you are the divorce, or you are divorced with divorce, with the divorce, right? That at-talaq or taliqun talaqan, that conveys a sense of the category, so the intention of three would count. But not because of not because of the number, but because of the sense of the category. And the category of talaq is how many? Is three. Which is where someone intended two, but I intended two. Because I thought about left punch, right punch. That's got nothing to do with divorce, right? Because the intention, right, only counts for that which is possible from what is an intention for, right? Right? So if someone stood to pray and said, I intend to fly for the sake of Allah, that's not an intention for prayer. If that was their only intention, right? Because the intention has to correspond to the act. So here is a verbal action. So the only intention that would count is something that is within the parameters of the words used. Okay. Is it directly related to the text? Go ahead.
What if someone uses a masdar in the book?
That's a separate thing. You've incorporated the number. Right? That's a separate matter. Right? وَالضَّرْبُ الثَّانِي الْكِنَايَاتِ, right, is an indirect pronouncement of divorce. Right? And Alam al-Maydani gives a good definition. He says, وَهِيَ مَا لَمْ يُوضَعْ لَهُ وَاحْتَمَلَهُ وَغَيْرَهُ. Right? The indirect pronouncement is one whose primary meaning is not divorce, but which could according to usage indicate divorce, and it could indicate other than divorce, right? And right? And so the kinaya, right? The kinaya is something whose primary meaning is not divorce, but that is used for divorce and other than divorce. And this is important, right? Because people get waswasa about this. Someone says, you're fat, ugly, and stupid. Let's say. And then they say, I intended divorce. Does fat, ugly, and stupid, any of these, is it used for divorce? No. So can the intention count for that? Right? Or in Arabic, someone said, anti thaqila. Is thaqila used for divorce? No. So it wouldn't count. Somebody say, anti sajjada. Have you ever, has an Arab ever said, like, is it used? So that returns to usage. And that's important. That gives us mercy as English speakers, because people don't typically use, right? Like, so for example, we'll see some examples of the kinaya, but many of those would not apply in English in their translation. So for example, go back to your family. Right? Do they use go back to your family for divorce in English? Right? No. Right? Because the usage is an important component of the indirect pronouncement, right? So these two components, so this is a good definition, right? ما لم يوضع الكنايات ما لم يوضع له, that which was it's the wada, like recall the Jurmiyah bil wada, in the usage of the Arab, its primary usage is not for divorce. واحتمله, this is critical, but yet it احتمله استعمالا, it has a potential usage of divorce in the usage of the Arabs as other possibilities, which are primary. So لا يقع بها الكنايات لا يقع بها الطلاق إلا بنية أو دلالة حال. Right? The kinayat, indirect pronouncements, talaq does not count except with intention. Right? And religiously, they always require intention. This is very important to be clear about. Religiously, they always require intention. أو دلالة حال, or context in court. Right? Because it's an important principle related to courts. The judge rules by the outward sense. The judge cannot judge on the basis of intent. As a general rule, it's not an absolute, but generally, الحكم بالظاهر. Right? But of course, with a clear outward sense, right? So, دلالة حال, or by the indication of the context, right? So there, this would be, for example, when they're discussing divorce, right? When they're discussing divorce, so he says, I no longer want to be married to you. I want to seek a divorce. He said, well, if you really don't, during those discussions, you know, he uses one of the expressions of the kinayat, which we'll see examples of them. Then in court, it would be considered, if it goes to court, it would be considered to be, what would it be considered to be? It would be considered to be a kinaya pronouncement. Even if you say, well, I didn't intend it. Because the state, she's discussing divorce, and you say one of these expressions, right? Right? Like, okay, so go into iddah. Right? So she says, I don't want to be married to you, please divorce me. Says, go into iddah. Is go into iddah an explicit pronouncement of divorce? No, it's kinaya. The Arabs use it, right? But religiously, it would constitute, when would it constitute divorce? If he intended it. Now these are tricky, right? These are tricky. Because and that's why one doesn't give fatwa, right? But you can't tell someone to make it intention, right? So just say you intended it, because between the person has to be honest. It's the idea of istafti qalbak, ask your heart. Be honest with yourself. Right? What was your intent when you pronounce it? Did you intend divorce when you pronounce it? Right? Because you can fake it in a worldly sense, but it's very, very serious, right? In some cultures, it's a big problem. Shaykh Muhammad Juma said that, some of the righteous that he met felt that one of the meanings of the hadith of in the hadith of the fitan, referring to وَيَفْشُ الزِّنَا, that zina, unlawful sexual relations, will become prevalent is not only from the public, there's a public spreading of zina, which is through people who never married, engaging in intercourse. But said is also the hidden zina, which is people who divorce themselves but yet continue to live together, either out of ignorance or out of lack of concern, right? Or out of wrong fatwas, right? Outside the circle of sound difference of opinion. So, okay. Right? Now the default is of the he says وهي على ضربين منها ثلاثة ألفاظ يقع بها الطلاق الرجعي ولا يقع بها إلا طلقة واحدة. Right? 3 constitute a revocable divorce, and it only counts as 1. Right? So these are exceptions. Right? One of these is قوله وهي قوله اعتدي. Right? Alright? اعتدي, because it's as if you've said أنت طالق فاعتدي. You are divorced, so enter into iddah. Right? So it's as if the pronouncement of divorce is implicit there. Right? And the second is, and don't learn bad adab here, وَاسْتَبْرِئِ رَحِمِكَ, clear your womb. That's one of the wisdoms of إِسْتَبْرِئِ رَحِمِكَ. That's one of the wisdoms of divorce. Clear your womb. Rahim, the womb. Clear your womb. That's one of the wisdoms of the iddah. But what's implicit there is a plain pronouncement of divorce. أنت طالق فاستبرئي رحمك. Or if you said أنت واحدة, right? You are one. Now, this is used by the Arabs, right? But it requires intention, because you can just mean you are one unique woman. Right? أنت واحدة في جمالك, in your beauty. But he said أنت واحدة. It's not so explicit. Right? Now, even in court, it would only count when, like if she said, طلقني, and he said, أنت واحدة. And that's what happened. The two parties, there's witnesses saying, there's either admission or witnesses saying that that's what was said. It would count as, in court, it would count as 1. Right? Now, the Qadi has a whole bunch of discretionary tools. He could, but that's a separate matter, right? Right? So in these 3 cases, right, the statement أنت طالق is implicit. If you see where it says in the comment in the Lubab, in وأنت واحدة, 3 lines below, he's in the commentary, and he's quoting the Hidayah. He says ولا يقع إلا واحدة لأن قوله أنت طالق. It only counts as 1 divorce because he's saying أنت طالق, you are divorced, is necessarily implicit in this, or necessarily entailed by this. Right? مقتضى is اقتضاء النص is what is necessarily implicit in it. Right? Right? So when you say أنت واحدة, as you say أنت طالق واحدة. Right? So he mentioned this before, though The reason he mentions this before, because these three pronouncements resemble what? The talaq al-sarih. Because the talaq with these three pronouncements is like the sarih. Because the talaq happens with as if you say anti taliqun يعني فاعتدي أنت طالق فاستبرئي رحمك أنت طالق واحدة. Then he says وبقية الكنايات, right? Okay, there's the commentary quotes that same quote from the Hidayah, also mentioned i'rab doesn't count because the common people don't use i'rab. Because it should be grammatically, it would only count if the wahida, for example, was mansub. Anti taliqun wahidatan. Right? But i'rab does not count, and that's the fatwa. I'rab doesn't count. Pronunciation doesn't count, as Ibn Abdin makes clear, quoting various sources. Someone says anti talaq or talaq, right? And anyone hearing this is a common mispronunciation, right? Would count. Someone in some cultures they flip the word zawj, they say Jows, which literally mean nut, which actually when I got to Damascus, I got very confused. Because one grocery store owner says, Kalamt Jozti. I talked to my nut. I thought it's do they refer to like the mind as, like, just like, hard? Something like, I was thinking coconut. I was talking to myself. Is that what it means? That's my assumption. I felt embarrassed. What is Joes? Because Joes means like you have Joes Hindi, right? Etc. They're different. But it's actually zawjati. Someone says talaqtu jawzati, and they're in a land where they say that, or people who mispronounce in that way. No one says, I meant that I have stopped eating coconut. Right? Because the isti'mal is given precedence over the literal meaning of something that's where the literal meaning is not in usage. Right? Okay. بقية الكنايات, and the remaining kinayat, right? He says, إذا نوى بها الطلاق كانت واحدة بائنة. The remaining expressions of indirect divorce count as one irrevocable divorce if he intended divorce. Right? Because it's the kinaya is considered a full pronouncement of divorced, right? And because of the clear presence of intent, it makes it a weighty pronouncement of divorce. And talaq al-ba'in is a weighty pronouncement of divorce, right? So any weighty pronouncement of divorce counts as ba'in, right? And because of the textual evidence entailing that, right? So, وَإِن نَوَى ثَلَاثًا كَانَتْ ثَلَاثًا. And in these cases, if you intend 3, it counts as 3, not because of the intention of the number, if you merely intended 3, right? But it counts as 3 because of the category, right? And he'll mention a number of examples of the talaq al-kinaya in a moment. وَإِن نَوَى اثنتين كانت واحدة. But if he intended two without saying you're divorced twice, right, by using one of these expressions, it would count as one, but ba'in, right? Because the intention is required to pronounce the talaq al-kinaya, the indirect pronunciation. The general case in talaq al-kinaya, it counts as irrevocable. Right? Irrevocable. It's a heavy pronouncement because you've intended it. And you use words, you specified foreign words to be used for divorce, so it's considered like a heavy pronouncement of divorce. He says, وَهَذَا مِثْلَ قَوْلِهِ أَنْتِ بَائِن. You are irrevocably divorced. أَنْتِ بَائِنٌ. Right? Now, ba'in means fully separated. Right? Fully separated. If you just said that but didn't intend it, what kind of divorce is it? Someone just said to his wife, "Anti ba'inun." What kind of talaq is it? It's not divorce. It's not divorce. Right? Anti ba'in. Or if he says, وَبَتَّةٌ. Right? البت هو القطع. You're cut off. Right? Right? It could mean many things. Right? البت هو القطع. You're cut off. Like you're cut off from all good. Right? You're cut off from me. It could mean all kinds of things, but for it to count as divorce, it requires intention, right? وَبَتْلَ. Right? Again, like the idea of removed, cut off. وَحَرَام. You're haram. It could just be it could just be an insult. You're haram. Like everything about you is haram, right? But also, you're haram for me. Right? But even if you say, Anti haramun alay, it could mean you're haram for me because you're so evil, it's haram for me to remain with you. But that does not necessarily mean divorce. Someone could be saying it regretfully, Anti haram, like, you're, it could mean many different things. So for it to count as divorce requires what? Intention. Because then, meaning you're prohibited from me because I've divorced you. I'm making you prohibited from me. Right? Right? وَحَبْلُكِ عَلَى غَارِبِكِ. Right? Literally, your rope is on your back, meaning you can go. Like I've let you go. Right? وَإِلْحَقِي بِأَهْلِكِ. Return to your family. إِلْحَقِي بِأَهْلِكِ or أَلْحِقِي بِأَهْلِكِ. Just similar meanings. Go back to your family. You're back with your family, or go back to your family. Both. Return. لَحِقَ. Go to them. Right? Right? وَأَنْتِ بَرِيَّةٌ. Right? You're free of me. Right? وَهَبْتُكِ لِأَهْلِكِ. I gift you to your family. وَصَرَّحْتُكِ. I have let you go. وَفَارَقْتُكِ. I am fully separated from you. But that doesn't work in English, because separation in English is something between, is less than divorce. But faraqtuki, I have parted with you. That'd be better. I've parted with you. Anti hurra, you are free. Right? But in modern Arab, people say that, they say that for everything. Anta hurr, you're free. Right? Where classically say أنت عبد, right? You're a slave. Right? But modern Arabs like saying أنت حر. Right? بدنا حرية, we want freedom, etc. Right? وتقنعي, put on your face veil. Right? وتخمري, put on your khimar. واستتري, go cover up. Now in English, so if you told someone go cover up, is that ever used for divorce? No. Right? You have to keep that in mind. Right? You have to keep that in mind. وغربي. وغربي is go far away. Right? Right? غريب. غرب is يعني غرب الشمس, it set, but means it went so far away that you can no longer see it. Right? That's it. Right? The gharib is someone who comes from a far away place. Right? And that's why it's also used for a stranger, like the ghurab. There's this just a bit of a strange bird. Right? وابتغي الأزواج, go find another husband, go find other husbands. Right? Right? Again, someone says something like that in English, nobody ever uses that for divorce. Right? Right? So then he gives an important principle, right? That people get confused about, right? فإن لم تكن له نية لم يقع بهذه الألفاظ طلاق. Right? If one does not have an intention, then these words do not constitute divorce. Right? Right? And this is ديانة. Right? إلا أن يكونا في مذاكرة الطلاق فيقع بها الطلاق في القضاء, unless they are discussing divorce, right? Then the divorce counts in court, in قضاء, يعني في القضاء يعني in court. Right? In court meaning in front of a qadi, right? But لا ديانة, right? Not ديانة. And you can see the discussion of this in Hashid ibn Abdin, the Bulaq edition, volume 2, page 463, if you'd like to look at the discussion. Right? So the Qadi judges by the outward, as Imam Alam al-Maydani mentions. وَلَا يَقَعُ فِيمَا بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. And it does not count between him and Allah. So, this would be the answer to the question, when are you divorced when you know you're not divorced? Very obvious answer. When are you divorced when you know you're not divorced? Right? Someone said one of the words of talaq al-kinaya, he knows he did not mean it. Right? He said, she asked for divorce, said, just go back to your family. إلحقي بأهلك. And he just meant like, just go away for a while. But they had witnesses, right? Unbeknownst to her, she had called 8 upright people to surround the living room. Unbeknownst to her, right? They're all standing there. Says she asked for divorce, and he's like, and he went, and he said, so Diyanatan, he knows she's not divorced from him, but if she goes to the Qadi, the Hanafi Qadi would deem it divorced, and the Qada, the ruling of the Qada is stronger than his own personal knowledge. Right? Now there's an intriguing principle that they'd say, Al-mar'atu kal-qadi. The woman is like the Qadi. Now, and that does not mean, see Zayn's getting worried, oh my God, what does that mean? But it does not mean that the woman is the judge, right? So don't teach that. in that sense, right? The woman is like the judge in the sense that the woman judges by the outward, when the outward is very clear. And she would not count his claim that I didn't intend it when the context clearly would specify, right? So the context, right? And it's in a state. She requested divorce, and he said, "i'taddi," go into iddah. And she just explicitly, right? So something that would clearly count in court, she knows that that's what he said. I didn't intend it. She would go with her on his judgment, and therefore there's details to that. Right? So the talaq, al-kinaya, that's why there's broadly three outcomes. Diyanatan, for the person pronouncing the divorce, what does it count as? When does it count? The talaq al-kinaya? Only with intention. In court, it also counts by the dilalat al-hal, by the context, right? The mudhakarat al-talaq or dilalat al-hal, right? Right? Dilalat al-hal by the context, such that she requested divorce, or they were discussing divorce, right? Now, with respect to her, when it's very clearly, she's very clear that there's no doubt that he could have only intended that outward, that's what it indicates, then she could treat it. But now, but the problem happens that neither party has authority over the other. Right? So when could a couple be divorced but not divorced? Yeah, I mean that one's raj'i, right? But in a kinaya situation, how could they be divorced but not divorced? There's possibilities when the husband deems that they're not divorced because he says, I didn't have intention. She holds that they are clearly divorced. Of course, assuming she's a faqihah, right? She knows the rulings, right? Or she asked, someone says, right? Now, and we just say, no, if she wants to remain in the, like, we have to say, no, like, the onus is to say, how are you sure that that's what it was, right? Because the words convey both meanings. Was the context that clear, etc., etc., etc.? Right? But it's possible. Then the only solution is they either come to an agreement or they'd have to take it to court or arbitrate. And so those cases can be very tricky, and that's why divorce cases are problematic, right? Not problematic, but they require expertise, and also if someone starts answering religious questions, etc., under the mentorship of their teachers, in divorce cases, because they have to do with so many implications, those are things that one consults one's teachers consistently until, they say, they give one authorization to answer those. They require special mumarasa, special training. Right? Right? So then he says, وَإِن لَمْ يَكُونَا فِي مُذَاكَرَةِ الطَّلَاقِ وَكَانَا فِي غَضَبٍ أَوْ خُصُومَةٍ وَقَعَ الطَّلَاقِ. Right? بِكُلِّ لَفْظٍ يُقْصَدُ بِهِ السَّبُّ وَالشَّتِيمَةِ. Right? So if they're not in a state of discussing talaq, right? So this one type of case where in court you do not need intention, which is when they're discussing divorce. Just divorce me. So he says a kinaya. Right? If they're not in a state of mudhakara, where they're discussing his divorcing her, then, but yet they're in a state of anger. So they've been fighting. Right? أو خصومة, adversity. They're having an argument. وقع الطلاق. Talaq counts, and this is very important, right? This is why commentaries are so critical. قضاءً. Talaq counts in court, not diyanatan. Right? بكل لفظ لا يقصد به السب والشتيمة. A divorce would count by all words. What kind of all words? This is an important. بكل لفظ, right? Right? بكل لفظ من الكناية, right? By all words, meaning all words of kinaya, of indirect, of the words of indirect divorce, whose meaning is not merely insult or shatima, right? Like, shatim, like it's insult, right? You just put, it's not just, so you say, like right? Now, divorce in anger counts. And this is one of the very sensitive matters, right? Divorce in a state of anger counts. And there are only two states, right? When it comes to divorce and anger. What's the default with respect to anger? Divorce counts. It's a pronouncement. The only time divorce in anger would not count in the Mu'tamad, in the Hanafi school, is when the anger is at a level where the person lost their rational faculties. Right? And where it reached the level of junoon, of insanity. Now, the diyanatan, now this is, they say, but that's khilaf al-asl. So it requires clear proof, even for the person. No, I am very clear, I had no clue what I was saying. But this is harder for the woman to accept. Because what's the basis? So in that state of extreme rage, could you have driven a car? Yes, you had your rational faculties. Right? What did you do right after? I walked through the door and I made myself, and I drank a cup of water, and then I went to the washroom and I washed my face. The sign that you could distinguish things. Right? And then I went to her room and ripped up her hijabs. Means that you're thinking wrong. Right? That's rage, but it's not. But you're still in charge. That's very dangerous. Now, Ibn Abidin classifies that differently. Most of the Indian scholars don't accept what Ibn Abidin has to say. It would appear it's one of the few places where Ibn Abidin, on issues of significance, where what Ibn Abidin said does not correspond to the mu'tamad of the madhab. Very interesting. Of all people, Ibn Abidin quotes Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, the student of Ibn Taymiyyah, in a very controversial thing that he said. And it's very fascinating because he quotes Ibn al-Qayyim, then he quotes from a Hanbali text that this is against the Hanbali school. Okay. So the Hanafi school, there's only two levels. Divorce counts. Divorce in a state of anger counts. The only time divorce in anger would not count is when someone's majnoon, because then they're not morally responsible. That's khilaf al-asl. Right? It would require clear proof that someone, right? But then Ibn Abidin unpacks the issue apparently in accordance with the Ibn Qayyim position that he quoted from the Hanbali text as being contrary to the Hanbali school. But even if it was relied upon in the Hanbali school, it still wouldn't count in the Hanafi school, because it's taken from another method. It's very problematic. And inshallah we'll dig up the section and share it with you, because it's fascinating. So there, actually a real case happened with a friend of mine. Him and his wife, then they're no longer together, would keep getting into fights. And he, in a state of rage, but still in control. So he was in this intermediate stage. It was strong anger, so rage. He was out of control, but not insane. غلب عليه الهذيان, right? You're out of control. So, but this is the difference between a faqih and a mufti, right? A faqih understands the school. A mufti knows how to give fatwa, right? And not all muftis are created equal, right? So my friend, who was a student of knowledge at that time in Damascus, went and asked a few ulama. And from there, solid study of the madhab, according to the principles of the madhab, which, in the, commentaries of the madhab, the lubab, ikhtiyar, etc., the principles that they know and that they teach, they said it counts. My friend, being a student of knowledge and a bit of a stickler for details, opened up Hashit ibn Abidin, showed it to him. They read the text, and he was very disappointed because it was the first time they're seeing it. They're like, huh? According to this, it would count. It would not count. So he did that with a couple of teachers. The difference, not every faqih is a mufti, right? Rightfully. So he asked me, what do I do? I said, what are you asking me? I said, but no, what do you advise in that situation? He said, I said, you should go ask Shaykh Adib. He said, but you can't go to see Shaykh Adib right now because after he was bedridden. I said, it doesn't matter if he's bedridden. Like, this is important. So your conscience is not clear. Go ask. Disappointingly, of course, he went to the Mufti of Damascus, asked him. The Mufti of Damascus was Hanafi at that time, gave a response that it counts. My friend showed him the text from Ibn Abdin. You can follow this opinion, it doesn't count. My friend was like, right? So he said, please ask the Mashaykh. So I compiled it into a question. I sent it to some of the scholars from the subcontinent. And I called Mufti Mahmoud Ashraf Usmani. I prepared hard. Each of the terms, it's a section in Ibn Abdin. The section, its summary, the key terms. I defined every single one of those terms from the reliable references in the Hanafi school. I broke it down into, what is the legal question and what's the context, and had all the details of the context in which happened, because that's important for solving divorce cases. I called Mufti Mahmoud Ashraf Usmani, who's the most impressive Hanafi faqih I've ever met, with no exceptions whatsoever. And he'd been sleeping, taking his afternoon nap. Assalamu alaikum. He's like, Hafiz. He said, no, and I told him. And he answered it. Like, I had my screen open, I had 5 windows with, the text from Ibn Abdin, the summary of the issues, the problems with the issue, the definitions, the case, my question, like more than 5. And he answered it. Said, this happens because when people divorce, it's more likely that they'll be upset than not upset. And they may well be angry. And very often, divorce happens when people are very angry. So this is not uncommon. And in that case, Ibn Abdin appears to do this. However, these are the issues. This is what the mashayikh, what our ulama say. We deal with it. This is the fatwa we give. This was addressed by, one of the great early 20th century Hanafis of the Indian subcontinent, and that's what all our madaris state. Whoa, that was like tour de force. That's a mufti, right? Otherwise, some people are just muftka mufti. They're just like a mufti, just like that, right? And then I started getting answers from some of the other madrasas. There's one major madrasa. I sent a little twist, because by that time my friend went to Shaykh Adib Kallas. So we received several answers. These answers that are religiously, someone followed a fatwa of a reliable scholar. Between them and Allah, even if they're in error, if they went to a qualified alim who's recognized to be qualified, they've absolved their due. So they went, he managed to, through Sidi Abu Munir, this and that, through much inconveniencing of multiple parties, got to Shaykh Adib Kallas. Shaykh Adib was bedridden. He was not supposed to sit up. The issue came. Shaykh Adib was always one for intellectual challenges. He sat up and he said, "Naam, هذه المسألة." Ibn Abdin does something very interesting in it. And he, even though he was in a very weak state, remembered the whole issue. Says, ظاهر المذهب is that there's only two levels of talaq in anger. And the asl is that it counts. However, Ibn Abdin takes this thing, and he is المحقق على الإطلاق, and diyanatan, someone could follow that opinion. And I've seen my teachers do that. So I sent another fatwa question to one of the major Darul Ulooms in one of the major Darul Iftaz fatwa centers in India, with a nuance to the question. I'd received several answers already, which was that this is the issue, but what if a reliable, God-fearing mufti, a reliable Hanafi faqih who's a mufti and who's God-fearing, gave fatwa according to his position, would it count or not? Could someone take it? So there's two questions. Do you consider it counting or not? And I knew by then, from what Mufti Mahmood mentioned, and several Darul Iftaz in Pakistan and India gave the same response. I knew this one's going to say the same. There's no point asking them as well, But the nuance, I asked them, does it count? But number two, but if they got fatwa from a reliable, a qualified Hanafi faqih, who's a reliable, trusted mufti, who's God-fearing, because that's an important quality in these matters. Such a Shaykh, I mentioned, put Shaykh Adib's name. Normally you wouldn't, but just, we're not talking about anybody. من أبرز فقهاء الحنفية في بلاد الشام. Shams. Because that's where Shami is from, right? Shami being Ibn Abdin. Anyways, so they responded that our opinion is that it counts. However, if someone took the opinion of Ibn thing, which we don't agree with, but between them and Allah, they would absolve themselves. So there is that leeway, possibly. But those things, you can't self-fatwa yourself, or these are very sensitive matters. Saharanpur gave a very interesting answer. The senior mufti there responded himself, right? And the answer was that we say on this issue, as regarding they say Alama al-Shami, regarding Ibn Abdin, the same as the two great students of Al-Kamal ibn al-Humam said about their teacher, right? Al-Muhaqqiq, Al-Kamal ibn al-Humam, which are Alama Qasim ibn Qutlubugha and Ibn Amir Haj, Abhathu Shaykhina la yultafat ilayha. They said the personal choices of our teacher are not of consideration. فنقول أبحاث الشامي لا يلتفت إليها. That the personal investigations of Ashami are of no consequence. And it says أي أبحاثه التي خرج فيها عن المذهب, is those choices where he stepped outside the madhab, meaning that they are not considered to constitute the relied upon position in the Hanafi madhab. So this is one of the nuanced issues, but this is why talaq is sensitive. Now, so here there's a little exercise which, in the commentary, and inshallah if you guys could diagram this nicely, read it together, that the kinayat are of three types, right? And we'll give a diagram with the recording for those of you who are online. You could diagram this section, the commentary here together. I want one diagram. That'll be very useful, but it's not a requirement in the class. There's different cases, but talaq in the various cases, does it count or not? The talaq al-kinaya. Now, then he says, وَإِذَا وَصَفَ الطَّلَاقَ بِضَرْبٍ مِنَ الزِّيَادَةِ وَالشِّدَّةِ كَانَ بَائِنًا. If one describes divorce, even with explicit words, like with the talaq sarih, with words indicating increase or intensity, it counts as an irrevocable ba'in pronouncement of divorce, right? مثل أن يقول أنت طالق بائن, you are irrevocably divorced. It counts as one, but irrevocable. Or أنت طالق أشد الطلاق, you're divorced with the most intense talaq. Or أفحش الطلاق, you are divorced with the vilest divorce. أو أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. أو أنت طالق طلاق الشيطان, you're divorced with the divorce of the devil. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. أو أنت طالق طلاق البدعة, you are divorced with a bid'ah talaq. It counts as talaq ba'in. وأنت طالق كالجبل, you are divorced like a mountain. It counts as one, but it counts as ba'in. أنت طالق ملء البيت, you're divorced with a divorce that fills this house. It counts as ba'in, right? Right? So these are not exactly the most exciting things, but and if you look in the bigger books, if you want some, they mention all kinds of other expressions, right? Right? Some of which are funny, some of which are sad, some of which are depressing, but it counts. So we'll continue from there in the section on divorce. Of course, divorce is very damaging, and it also highlights the danger of anger. And one of the things is, and there's grave harms in divorce. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us healthy marriages and distance us from the causes of divorce and ruin, unless that separation be bil ma'roof, in a good way. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad نبي الرحمة وآله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.